Hi, everyone. During this video, I will give you three strategies for defining behaviors with students you work with. You might be asking, why is defining behaviors important? Let's start with an example. Off-task behaviors when we typically come across in the world of behavior and in our work with students in the school setting. Let's say that I'm asked to collect data on off-task behavior. So I go into a classroom and I interpret off-task behavior as anytime that student leaves their seat or leaves the classroom without permission. Okay, then someone else comes in to collect data a different day, and they assume that off-task behavior is talking with peers without permission. Okay, and then a third day, somebody comes in and they say cell phone use without permission. That's what I'm looking at with off-task behavior. All three of us have collected data on off-task behaviors, but different off-task behaviors because that definition isn't very clear. It's pretty open to interpretation. We don't want that with the behaviors that we are targeting because it makes it really tough to accurately and consistently collect data. How can we say with any degree of confidence that we are facilitating meaningful behavior change with our interventions if the data is based on observations of different behaviors, right? So that's why defining behaviors is so important to make sure that we are accurately and consistently collecting data that we can use to assess and evaluate the effectiveness of our interventions. Okay, so three strategies for defining the behaviors that you are addressing with your students. Number one is a so what test. Why is that behavior important to address? How does it promote academic achievement? How does it facilitate social interaction? How does it maintain that student safety or the safety of others? Okay, if the behavior does not pass all the so what test, we don't need to address it. Okay, so in other words, slouching. Okay, is slouching impacting academic achievement, social interaction, and or safety? No, guess what? We don't need to address slouching. Maybe we don't need to address gazing, eye rolling, different behaviors like that. It has to be socially significant. So ask yourself, could I explain to 10 to 15 in 10 to 15 seconds why this behavior will enhance academic achievement, social interaction, or maintain that student safety or the safety of others? If the answer is no to all three of those, it probably doesn't pass that so what test, and we don't need to address it. Okay, so that's test number one. The second one is the stranger test. So ask yourself this, based on your written description of the target behavior, could somebody unfamiliar with the student, that's what we mean by a stranger, could somebody unfamiliar with the student come in, take a look at your written description of the behavior and accurately collect data? Okay, so let's go back to that example of off-task behavior. Based just on that definition, I would argue that it would be really tough for somebody to come in and accurately collect data on what off-task behavior looks like without additional information. That would be an example of a behavior that does not pass that stranger test. But maybe we say off-task behavior will be defined as students leaving assigned areas without permission, using cell phones without permission, and or talking to peers without permission. Okay, suddenly that's more objective and measurable and specific. I can come in and accurately collect data. Even if I've never met the student before, I could accurately and consistently collect data on off-task behavior based on that written description. Okay, two things to avoid in alignment with that stranger test. Number one is leaving feelings out of our definitions of target behaviors. So rather than saying the student angrily threw their work on the ground, we can't really measure anger. We would just say the student threw their work on the ground. Okay. Also leaving out perceptions. So the student intended to disrespect their teacher by throwing work on the ground. We can't really understand what that student was intending to do or not intending to do. Instead of saying the student intended to disrespect their teacher by throwing their work on the ground, we would just say the student threw their work on the ground. Okay. So leaving feelings and perceptions out of our definitions. And the third one, and probably the strangest one, it's called the dead man test, which is a little bit cryptic. The dead man test basically means we want to focus on what the student's doing, not what they're not doing. Okay, so technically behavior is defined as the activity of living organisms. So if a dead person can do it, it's not a behavior. So what that means is we want to focus on what the student's doing, not what they're not doing. So instead of making your target behavior not listening, not paying attention, not following directions, not transitioning, different things like that, focus on what that student is doing. Okay. Maybe it is using their cell phone without permission, leaving assigned areas without permission, talking with peers without permission, calling out without permission. Okay. Those are examples of observable, measurable behaviors, the activity of living organisms. We want to focus on what the student's doing, not what they're not doing. If you ask me to collect data on not paying attention, I would have a really hard time doing that. But if you ask me to collect data on a student using their cell phone, I could do that a lot easier. So those are the three tests, three strategies for defining behaviors. The so what test, looking at social significance, the stranger test, looking at specific observable, measurable descriptions of behavior, and the dead man test, focusing on what the student's doing, not what they're not doing. I hope this helps as you work with your students and define behaviors to target for behavior change.